I used to believe my front yard was just that, mine. A quiet stretch of green that had taken years to grow, trimmed by hand every spring. A living wall of hedges that gave my home privacy and peace. Neighbors waved. Kids rode bikes past it. Cars slowed down, not because they had to, but because it felt like the kind of street where you did. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning I'll never forget. I woke up to the sound of engines. Not traffic. Not lawnmowers. Something sharper. Louder. When I stepped outside, I saw men in reflective vests standing where my hedges had been for over a decade. Electric trimmers screamed. Green leaves fell like rain. And behind them, across the street, stood members of the HOA, clipboards in hand, smiling like this was all perfectly normal. No warning. No knock on the door. Just destruction. They said my hedges blocked a scenic shot. Apparently, someone important wanted clean sightlines for photos of the neighborhood. My home, my effort, my time, reduced to an inconvenience on a checklist. I stood there frozen, trying to process how something I cared for could be erased so easily, so casually, under the banner of community standards. The setting was picture-perfect suburbia. Identical mailboxes, fresh pavement, flags on porches. But in that moment it felt cold. Investigative questions started spinning in my head. Who approved this? When did they decide my property was expendable? And why did it feel like I was the only one who hadn't been told? What hurt most wasn't just the loss. It was the way they looked at me afterward. Sympathetic smiles mixed with quiet confidence. As if this was over. As if I'd sigh, complain a little, then move on like everyone else does. But I didn't move on. That empty stretch of dirt where my hedges once stood became something else in my mind. Not loss. Space. Possibility. If the HOA wanted a view, if they were so obsessed with appearances and control, then maybe it was time to give them exactly what they asked for, just not in the way they expected. A week later, as paperwork circulated and whispers spread, a massive delivery truck turned onto our street. The HOA board didn't notice at first. No one did, until the sound of metal echoed through the neighborhood. The hedges weren't just plants to me. I planted the first ones the year I moved in, back when the house still smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Every summer, I trimmed them after work, sweat on my neck, music playing low through an open window. They grew as my life settled. When things went wrong inside the house, that line of green outside was where I stood to breathe. Losing them felt personal in a way I couldn't explain to the HOA or anyone who hadn't built something slowly by hand. The HOA and I had history, though none of it dramatic. A warning once about trash cans left out too long. Polite email about paint colors. I followed the rules because it was easier than fighting them. They liked compliance. Smiles at meetings. Quiet authority. That's why the sudden destruction hit harder. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision made without me. After that morning, the neighborhood felt different. People still waved, but their eyes lingered. Some avoided me entirely. Others whispered sympathy, careful not to be seen doing it. The HOA president sent an email filled with soft language about shared aesthetics and community vision. No apology. Just justification. The keywords jumped out at me. Standards, compliance, approval, as if repeating them enough would make the act feel reasonable. At night, I replayed the scene. The sound of trimmers, the casual laughter, the way my yard was suddenly exposed to the street, every window on display. I started to wonder how often this happened to others. How many people had quietly swallowed the same treatment because pushing back felt pointless. Then the notices started appearing. New guidelines, revised landscaping rules, a push for uniform sightlines ahead of an upcoming promotional shoot. That's when it clicked. My hedges weren't the problem. They were just in the way of an image someone wanted to sell. I requested the paperwork, meeting notes, approval forms. Weeks passed with no response. When I followed up, the replies grew colder, defensive, vague. It was clear now, asking questions made me a problem. Meanwhile, that bare stretch of yard sat untouched, drawing more attention than the hedges ever had. I felt exposed, watched. Every time a car slowed, I wondered if they were judging me or waiting to see what I'd do next. because something was coming. I hadn't said it out loud yet, but the decision had already started to take shape. And whether the HOA realized it or not, they had pushed me past the point of quietly accepting anything ever again. Once the decision settled in my chest, everything else seemed to react to it. Word spread faster than I expected. A neighbor I barely spoke to stopped me one evening, voice low, asking if I'd heard anything about upcoming enforcement checks. Another slipped a note into my mailbox. No name, just a warning to be careful. It felt like lines were being drawn, quietly, without anyone saying it out loud. The HOA, on the other hand, became very visible. Board members started walking the street more often, measuring tape clipped to belts, phones out, taking photos. Officially, it was routine, but the timing made it hard not to feel targeted. I caught myself second-guessing everything. Was my anger justified, or was I about to become the difficult homeowner they could point to as an example? That question followed me into late nights. I'd sit at the kitchen table, paperwork spread out, reading bylaws I'd never bothered with before. The rules were full of gray areas, phrases like reasonable discretion and visual harmony. The more I read, the clearer it became how much power interpretation gave them, and how easy it would be for me to cross an invisible line without realizing it. There were other pressures too. A friend suggested letting it go, said fighting the HOA was a losing battle. Another quietly admired the idea of standing up, but warned me that escalation had consequences. I started to see my own flaw in all of this: pride. A stubborn refusal to back down once I felt wronged. Was this about justice, or about proving something? Meanwhile, pieces of information surfaced in strange ways. A contractor mentioned the HOA had already approved temporary structures for filming equipment. A casual comment at the store hinted that fines had been discussed if things got out of hand. Nothing concrete, just enough to raise the stakes. At the same time, that empty space in my yard began to feel intentional, almost provocative. I left it bare longer than necessary. I wanted them to notice. I wanted to see how far they'd go before saying something directly. Every morning, I checked the street like it might change overnight. Every evening, I imagined reactions that hadn't happened yet. The tension wasn't loud, but it was constant, stretching thin across the neighborhood. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a delivery date was penciled into my calendar. No one else knew what it meant yet, but once that truck arrived, there would be no pretending this was a misunderstanding anymore. The week before the delivery moved slower than the months before it. Every sound outside made me look up. Every email notification tightened something in my chest. The HOA notices stopped being friendly reminders and started reading like warnings. Carefully worded, official, heavy with implication. I barely slept. In the mornings, I'd stand at the edge of my yard, staring at the empty stretch where the hedges once stood. Sunlight poured in now, unfiltered, exposing everything. My windows, my routines, me. It felt deliberate, like the neighborhood itself was watching, waiting to see who would blink first. The HOA president finally approached me in person. Not alone. 2 board members with her, positioned just far enough back to look casual. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Said there had been concerns. Asked what my plans were for the yard. The word plans hung between us. I kept my answers vague. Said I was reviewing the guidelines. Said I wanted to stay compliant. That word again. She nodded, satisfied for the moment, but I could tell she didn't believe me. As they walked away, I caught fragments of their conversation. Permits, timelines, enforcement. That night, an email arrived. Subject line, pre-approval reminder. It listed restrictions I hadn't seen before. Temporary structures, visual obstructions, fines for non-compliance. No direct accusation, just a tightening of the rules like a net being pulled closed. I paced the house, rereading it. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far already. If this was the moment to step back, smooth things over, reclaim some sense of peace. The easier path was right there. But outside, under the streetlight, I noticed a car parked longer than necessary. Someone sitting inside, watching the yard. Or maybe I was imagining it. At that point, the difference didn't matter. The delivery confirmation buzzed on my phone just after midnight. Scheduled. Locked in. No refunds. The next morning, neighbors gathered in small clusters, as if something unspoken had passed through the street. A few avoided eye contact. Others looked openly curious. The air felt charged, like the seconds before a storm breaks. I stood in my doorway, keys in hand, heart pounding, when a familiar rumble echoed down the road. Deep, metallic, getting closer. And that's when the HOA president stepped back onto my lawn. Phone raised, already recording. The truck didn't stop in front of my house. It slowed, crawled past the bare yard, then rolled another 20 feet before braking hard. For a split second, my stomach dropped. Had they rerouted it? Had the HOA gotten to them first? The president's phone stayed raised, her smile tight, like she was already narrating her version of events. Then the driver stepped out. Not confused. Not apologetic. Calm. He looked straight at me and asked for my name. Behind us, the HOA president lowered her phone just enough to speak. She said the structure wasn't approved. Said she'd already contacted enforcement. Said fines would start immediately. Her confidence was absolute, like she knew something I didn't. That's when the driver held up his tablet. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at her. Permit number. Address. Date. Approved weeks ago. The shift was instant. Her smile vanished. One of the board members stepped forward, whispering urgently. I caught fragments. That's not possible. We delayed that. Who signed off? And then another truth surfaced, quietly, from the edges of the crowd. A neighbor spoke up. Then another. Apparently, the HOA had fast-tracked approvals for temporary structures related to the promotional shoot. Filming platforms, equipment containers, visual obstructions suddenly weren't a problem when they served the right purpose. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was structural. I realized then this hadn't been about rules. It had been about control. Who they enforced them against. Who they didn't. The driver asked again if he should proceed. I hesitated. Across the street, the HOA president was already making a call. Her back turned, voice sharp and low. Another board member met my eyes for the first time. There was something close to pleading there, as if I might still choose the quiet ending. Save them the embarrassment. Save the image. But down the block, I noticed movement. Another truck. Smaller. Marked with the same production logo I'd seen mentioned in emails. The shoot was happening today. Right now. Their timeline and mine were colliding in real time. This was the moment I hadn't fully prepared for. The point where standing my ground would expose more than just my own grievance. It would force everything into the open. The double standards. The selective enforcement. The lies dressed up as guidelines. The driver's finger hovered over the screen, waiting for my answer. And as the sound of the second truck grew louder, I understood that whatever I said next wouldn't just change my yard. It would change the neighborhood. I told the driver to proceed. The container came down slowly, metal chains groaning, the sound echoing through the street. Conversations stopped. Phones came out. The HOA president turned back just in time to see it touch the ground, solid and undeniable, right where my hedges used to be. Ruststrikt. Massive. Impossible to ignore. She stepped forward, voice raised now, no longer careful. She quoted bylaws. Sreten di midit fines. Said this would be handled. But her words felt thin against the weight of what everyone was watching. The container wasn't temporary looking or subtle. It was a statement, and it was legal. Then the second truck arrived. Crew members climbed out, looking confused as they took in the scene. One of them checked a printed layout, then looked at the HOA board. I heard him say it plainly. This wasn't the view they'd been promised. The clean sightline was gone. That's when the real unraveling began. Emails were pulled up, messages forwarded. In trying to block my permit, the HOA had overlooked something else, an approval chain that showed selective enforcement in writing. Exceptions made. Rules bent. All for the sake of an image they wanted to sell. A neighbor forwarded it to the production manager. Another copied the city liaison. The conflict was no longer private. The HOA president's phone rang again. This time, she didn't answer right away. When she did, her posture changed. Shoulders tight, voice low. She walked away from the group, heels clicking sharply on the pavement. The container settled fully. Silence followed. I stood there, heart pounding, expecting relief. Instead, I felt something heavier. A strange calm mixed with sadness. This hadn't been about winning. It had been about being heard. Then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. The driver handed me a final document to sign and casually mentioned the permit had been approved by an interim board member. Someone who'd resigned quietly weeks earlier. A name I recognized. The same person who'd once warned me to be careful. The anonymous note. The delay that never quite worked. They hadn't just watched this happen. They'd helped set it in motion. As the trucks pulled away and the HOA retreated into urgent whispers, I realized the fortress in my yard wasn't the biggest change that day. It was the balance of power, and it had already shifted. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. The container stayed. The fines never came. The promotional shoot was quietly moved to another street, and the HOA stopped sending emails altogether. When the next meeting rolled around, it was announced that the president would be stepping back due to personal reasons. No explanations. No apologies. Just a careful reshuffling that said everything without saying anything at all. Neighbors started talking again. Not in whispers this time. Some thanked me for pushing back, for asking the questions they'd been afraid to ask. Others admitted they'd voted yes to rules they never thought would be used this way. The street felt human again. Messy, imperfect, honest. As for the container, it didn't stay a fortress forever. Over time, I softened it. Vines climbed the metal. A mural appeared on one side, painted with the help of kids from the block. What started as a symbol of defiance slowly became something else. A reminder that space, like community, can be reclaimed and reshaped. I replanted hedges too. Not the same ones. New growth, different layout. Took patience, but that felt right. Healing usually does. The interim board member never came forward publicly, but one evening I found a note taped to my door. No signature. Just 3 words, you did good. That was enough. Looking back, I realized the real conflict was never about landscaping or scenic shots. It was about who gets a voice and who's expected to stay quiet. The HOA saw rules as tools. I saw them as agreements. That difference changed everything. I won't pretend it was easy. Standing up cost me sleep, comfort, and a version of peace I'd gotten used to. But it gave me something better in return, clarity. And a sense of ownership that goes deeper than property lines. If there's a lesson here, it's this. Silence is convenient, but it isn't neutral. The moment you stop questioning, someone else decides for you. I still sit on my porch in the evenings. The street looks different now, but it feels more honest. And every time the light hits that weathered steel just right, I'm reminded that even something rusty can become a boundary, a canvas, or a turning point. So if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt pushed aside or unheard, share it, like it, subscribe for more stories about ordinary people facing quiet power. And remember this, sometimes the strongest thing you can build isn't a wall. It's a line you refuse to let anyone cross.